There seems to be an attack on children nowadays. There's a desire to change what children actually believe.
This is the way that the enemy first seeks to go after changing our culture. There are flesh and blood people that are taking their actions to serve Satan.
We want to just give voice to a lot of those things that you see, that you hear, and you think, y'all seeing this? Anybody else seeing what I'm seeing? Anybody else think that these people are crazy? Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to our podcast today. I'm Marty and McLain along with Paul Price, and this is actually our first episode. We are calling it episode 0. We really don't have a name for our podcast yet, and so that is something that we will have in the coming weeks. But there are a lot of issues that we want to talk about, a lot of issues that people are trying to come to grips with, and I want to at this time let Paul tell a little bit about himself so y'all know who Paul is.
Sure. Well, great to be with you here, Marty, getting started with this. It's fun. I have a past of being very involved in Christian apologetics. I used to be employed professionally in the apologetics field for one of the major creation organizations. And, since then I've accepted secular employment, so I wouldn't call myself a professional, but I'm still very interested in the topic of apologetics and in the Bible in general, and how it intersects with the world that we're in today and the things that we see going on around us. So I look forward to getting to talk with you about these topics.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, you are the heavyweight here. I am like the minor leaguer here, but I'm excited about what we can talk about. Hopefully, we can bring it with a lot of insight and knowledge, some humor with it as well. Looking forward to it. But one of the things that's been interesting in our culture today, I'm sure a lot of people have kept up with this. I know I have, having grandchildren and, know a lot of people who have children. There seems to be an attack on children nowadays. It seems that our culture, more than ever before, they are going after the children. And Paul, why do you think that's the case? Well,
when I've looked into this, I've come to the conclusion that it's really nothing new. That this is the way that the enemy first seeks to go after changing our culture, because the enemy knows that children, and not just the enemy, everybody knows that children are easily moldable, and the Bible says that if you raise up a child in the way that they should go, they're not going to depart from it. And I think that's a generalization. Obviously, there are counterexamples. Occasionally you'll see someone that is raised in the right way and then they depart from it. So it's not, I don't think the Bible is saying that is an ultimatum that there can never be a counterexample. But in general, the way that we raise our kids, I think, is the way that they grow up and they go after that. And so the enemy knows that if they can mold the minds of children while they're still impressionable and while they don't really understand the ramifications of what they're being taught, then that is going to be the best way to change society in the long run. I think the enemy, so much more so perhaps than we are, the enemy is extremely patient and extremely forward-thinking in terms of having a long-range goal in mind. And so for me, what I see is that what's been going on in our society has been one step, if you think forward in terms of forward into liberalism or into what they call progressivism, it's always kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So that
right.
the society will react against something and say, oh no, that's too liberal, so we'll swing back. But it seems like overall we always wind up more liberal than we were to begin with after the decade is out. So why are they going after kids? Is because kids will grow up, and then that standard that you set with those kids becomes the new normal, right? That's a phrase they use, the new normal.
It's a bad normal.
So, yeah, I did a little bit of research into, how we got into this position of public education. I went to public school. I can't remember if you said you did or not. But
yeah, I'm a public school product, and anytime something goes wrong, I fall back on that.
Well, there you go, and that's true for me too. And I enjoyed it at the time, but the sad truth is, it has changed so much since you and I were in school. And I graduated high school in 2004, which might not seem like all that long ago, but the truth is, it's changed tremendously even since then.
Right, I graduated 20 years before that in '84, and it has definitely changed since 1984.
Yeah, well, this goes back, the idea of having a public school, as in a government funded or government controlled school, goes back all the way to Horace Mann in the 1800s. He's called the father of public education, and I found that he was a member of the Unitarian sect. Have you heard of Unitarians?
Yeah, it's you don't have to believe much of anything, right?
Well, so I think that's what they've kind of evolved into at this point, the Unitarian Universalists. I think back in the 1800s there might have been a little bit more to it than that, but they were still a heretical sect even at that time. They were teaching, they were denying, I think, hell. They were denying the deity of Christ. They were denying the Trinity. So they were a heretical group even in the 1800s.
Wow. Yeah.
And so Horace Mann, his whole argument was that education should be non-sectarian. But what he even at that time meant by that was not what people today would mean by it. He was still thinking that the Bible would be taught, but it just wouldn't be taught from a denominational perspective. Was kind of his angle on it.
Didn't Thomas Jefferson want the Bible in the public schools?
I can't say for sure. I can't remember on that. I know Jefferson wasn't a Christian,
right? That's the whole thing they always say.
But yeah, I mean, back at this time, it was I was talking about how it's one little step at a time. So, with Horace Mann, he didn't want to get rid of the Bible out of schools. He just didn't want there to be any sort of, he wanted it to be publicly run, and he didn't want it to have any kind of denominational spin on it. So that was palatable to people at that time. A quote from him is, "We who are engaged in the sacred cause of education are entitled to look upon all parents as having given hostages to our cause." So, I mean, even back from the original founding of the idea of public school, they're talking about, parents are giving up hostages. Well, the truth is, the Constitution never authorized the federal government to be involved in education. It never listed education as something the federal government should be charged with. And it really comes down to being a conflict of interest. The people, the founders of our country had this idea that the people and the government were at odds, and so that was a good thing, because the people were supposed to be checking, and the various branches of government were supposed to be checking one another and limiting one another to prevent the power of the federal government from getting out of control. And the idea that we would give the most important task of all to educate our children, the idea that we would give that over to the federal government, I think would have been pretty foreign to the founders of our country. And it seems to me, I don't know what you would say on this, but to me it's just a fundamental conflict of interest.
Yeah, I think most people, we want local control of education. I don't want the federal government in charge of it, and I don't think everybody's equipped to homeschool. I mean, as a family, we homeschooled some, we put private schools some, public schools some. Kind of had a whole mixed bag. But I think what is happening is you have a lot of the education. We got great teachers out there, and great people in these schools, but there's a direction that is being set in these schools, especially now with COVID. So many parents found out what their kids were actually being taught in school, and they saw the books, they saw the instruction, and they were just appalled of the, it's no longer about reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's more about transgender issues, LGBT situations. There's all type of there's a desire to change what children actually believe, and they try to do it at a very young age. And I think with the bill, the Parental Rights and Education bill that they passed down in Florida, and Governor DeSantis signed that bill, I believe it just said you couldn't instruct children kindergarten through third grade in sexual issues at school. And there's so many people that are upset about that. And actually, Walt Disney World, the corporation, came out against it. And because of that, they included a same-sex kiss in the Buzz Lightyear cartoon as kind of a finger in the eye of Governor DeSantis down there. Now, it's interesting, Michael Youssef, a local pastor in the Atlanta area, he wrote an article about situations such as this, about the attack on children, and he quotes a guy named James Lindsay, who he says is probably the world's leading authority on the radical left movement. And here's what he says. One of the targets that woke culture wants to dismantle is the innocence of children. These critical theories see the innocence of children as a fundamental problem that has to be overcome in order to achieve the children's liberation. They seek to achieve the sexual liberation of children, to achieve gender liberation, to achieve racial liberation. He continues on that they want to break down childhood innocence, literally to destabilize individual children, to make them susceptible to politically actionable points of view. If they can't understand themselves and feel confident in whom they are, they will be politically manipulative. They will be able to politically manipulate them. They will be anxious and depressed. They will be, here's the word, groomable. This destabilization of children is quite intentional. So this guy is coming at it from a neo-Marxism, progressivism, wokeism, whatever you want to call it, point of view. And I think it just bears to mention the old adage, the hand that rocks the cradle will one day rule the world. These people know that if you can have an impressionable impact upon a child, then you're going to set the course of that child's life. And if you set them in a way where they will be more, let's go ahead and say it, progressive, then they'll be more accepting of Marxism, of socialism, of basically big government control. But as Americans, one of the things I like about our country, in the founding of our country, is that we don't believe that government gives us rights. We believe that our rights are given us by God, and they are to not be infringed upon by the government. And I think there's a totally different viewpoint of origin, where we came from. We're going to do a podcast eventually on your strong suit, Paul, on creationism.
I'm looking forward to that.
But, from origin, where do we come from? Where do we get our rights? To, is it the government that gives us the rights, or has God given us these rights? And is it the government's responsibility to protect our rights and not to infringe upon our rights? And that's just a total different worldview. So there is I would say, a Marxist type focus in these schools. And they are targeting kids with their sexuality, which is so bizarre. I've got, we talked about the whole aspect with, Disney. Disney has an agenda not just from, Walt Disney World or certain movies. They also have stuff that's on their cable stations that they do not send a good message to kids. And Paul, you've got small kids. How do y'all watch, protect what your kids take in?
Yeah, to me, for any Christian parent, I think it should just be said that the modern day version of Disney is something that you should regard with the greatest amount of caution and skepticism. In my house, we don't really watch modern day Disney content. We do like a lot of the classic stuff and stuff from the 90s, and you do have to draw the line somewhere, because over the decades Disney content has gotten more and more progressive and more overtly political and trying to put agendas into their stuff. So I wouldn't really recommend that Christians, direct their kids to modern day Disney stuff at all.
One of the things that Disney has out is a show called Little Demon. And I think the mom has a sexual fling with Satan and gives birth to a female Antichrist.
Oh my!
And
I have not heard of that.
Yeah, it's bizarre. And here's what it says: 13 years after being impregnated by Satan, a reluctant mother and her Antichrist daughter attempt to live an ordinary life. And you think, well, who comes up with a storyline like that? I mean, why would you come up? What are you sitting around thinking about? Hey, let's create a cartoon where we'll have a woman having an affair with Satan, and they'll have a Antichrist girl. That's just bizarre.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if that's actually intended to be for kids or not. But either way, the thing is, if it's a cartoon, it's kind of assumed that if it's a cartoon, kids are going to watch it.
You are exactly right. It's one of these adult, type cartoons, but at the same time, a cartoon is a cartoon. I mean, let's just a cartoon's a cartoon, and it's Disney. I mean, it's still, this is what Disney is putting out, as though it's something. I don't know. You think, okay, what kind of decisions are these people making? What other type of decisions are they making if this is the product that they're pushing? Now, it's not just Disney. I don't want to pick on Disney, but they give you a lot of material. But the whole drag queen story hour that's gotten real popular in some of the, I reckon, northeastern states, even some of the southern states. I think some of the cities possibly. It's so bad that the Michigan Democratic Attorney General, now this lady's the Attorney General for the whole state of Michigan, who herself is gay, Dana Nessel, she says, quote, "Drag queens make everything better. Drag queens are fun. A drag queen for every school." I mean, no longer is a chicken for every school, but we need a drag queen for every school. Why? Because they make things fun. When you see politicians starting to get involved in drag queen stuff and thinking it's a great idea. We also have a situation in the state of Virginia where there is a state delegate. I mean, this person represents people in their state house. Elizabeth Guzman, she wants to pass a bill, according to this article, that a parent who refuses to affirm their children's sexual identity confusion could be investigated for child abuse and be subject to a police and child protective services investigation and face felony criminal penalties if they do not go along with their child's desire to change their gender. That's somebody that's in elected office. And also what's so crazy is that she tries to use the Bible to endorse what she says. She says, quote, "The Bible says to accept everyone for who they are." I don't know what verse that is. I don't know what book of the Bible that comes from, but she tries to put the weight of the Bible behind it.
Yeah, and I was just looking at that demon cartoon. That might actually be. It looks like that might be Fox instead of Disney. Not sure if that's Disney or not, but either way, I think what you brought out there is a good point about how our society has gotten to a point where the idea of having an antichrist, demon is now considered to be somehow a comedy or entertainment. It's something people would want to accept as a comedy now.
Right.
And it kind of goes to the heart of the way that our culture has fully rejected the Christian roots that gave birth to our culture today. Right. And in fact is mocking those Christian roots. And it's really hard to think of an example of any other cultures around the world today that are so irreverent toward their own foundations, right? I mean, what we have to realize is that the people in charge at the top running our government the idea that those people would in any way share the worldview that was held by our founding fathers, we need to get that out of our heads.
Yeah,
the people that we are voting for on both sides of the aisle, I hate to say,
there's some,
unfortunately,
there's some
but
shockers.
the people in charge of this country do not hold to even the basic Judeo-Christian worldview that not all of our founding fathers were Christians.
Right.
Some of them were deists.
Yeah.
But even those that were deists, like Thomas Jefferson, they still held to a basic Judeo-Christian worldview.
Right. They had a concept of right and wrong.
They had a concept of Christian morals.
Right.
And they had a concept that some type of God existed. Not even that much can we grant to the people that are in charge today. So I think a lot of Christians need to wake up, and they need to stop being so gullible. You know, when we're involved in politics or when we're talking about who we're going to vote for, Christians need to understand that, unfortunately, we are stuck picking the what appears at least to be the lesser of evils, right?
Yeah,
and
that's kind of how we.
You know, it'd be great if we could get a candidate that truly represented conservative Christian values. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen that happen. I don't know what you think of Ron Paul, but I think maybe Ron Paul might be the closest thing to an actual conservative that I've seen in politics for a while, and so. But even the Republicans are not really true conservatives anymore, right? They call them neocons, whatever that's supposed to mean.
Yeah, there are some that have kind of expanded beyond the definition. I mean, when you have some Republicans that are congratulating people, two men who are adopting babies, are doing artificial insemination to have children, and it's the same sex couple. You're like, that's really not what conservatives or Bible believing people stand for. So we understand we will have a podcast on a Christian's role in politics, because I think it's very, very important, and I'm all for that. But just to kind of reiterate your point, here's a article from Fox News. It says, in an interview with left-wing outlet Now This News, President Biden answered an array of questions pertinent to young Americans. At one point, Biden was asked by 25-year-old transgender actress and comic creator Dylan Mulvaney if states should have the right to ban gender-affirming health care. Quote, "I don't think any state or anybody should have the right to do that. As a moral question and as a legal question, I just think it's wrong." So our president thinks that it's wrong for somebody to not allow a child to have, or I would imagine, the hormones, the body-altering hormones as children. Wanting to transition, they're minors. He thinks that's okay from what appears from the article. And he also says, "I feel very, very strongly that you should have every single solitary right, including the use of your gender identity bathrooms when public." So he's also saying that he thinks that men should be able to go into the bathrooms basically with little girls.
Okay, but just to
that's the president.
Well, just to split hairs, it's the people who wrote the president's material, right?
Well, I know that. I know I know he's not coming up with it himself.
If you want me,
I understand that.
If you want me to be honest, I don't really believe a single thing that comes out of Biden's mouth came out of Biden's mind, except for the gaffes.
It's really surprising what's going on in our country with the president and his full throttle embrace of the LGBTQ. Couple more letters now, I think, agenda. Mm-hmm. He just embraces it, or whoever writes for him, or whatever, however that's going on. He is for it. He's promoting it. I was even seeing, like a couple of weeks ago, there was a girl in a volleyball game, a high school game in North Carolina, who suffered neck and head injuries because a guy was playing on the other girls' team, and spiked the volleyball and injured her. I mean,
yeah.
But they're going to want guys to compete on girls' teams. that. No offense to the rapper, but that's ludicrous. That's
Well, it's a satanic agenda. Let's call it what it is.
Agenda. It is very much a satanic agenda, and I think even with the. Even with you talking about children, you talking about with the pro-abortion stuff that's going on. They have Stacey Abrams, the Democratic candidate for governor in the state of Georgia. She made a comment about abortion being an economic issue, and the only reason why you're worried about the price of price of bread and gas is because you had kids or something, as though abortion would be an issue. That if you abort children, you wouldn't be as concerned about the economy. And most people heard that quote and they were like, I can't believe she's saying this.
Yeah, but it's kind of it's gotten to a point where there's just nothing that they won't say out loud now because they've reached that stage. So
they've gotten emboldened.
Well, so going back to what I was talking about before, it's a gradual process. And the enemy gradually wins a little victory here, a little victory there, one generation after another. The society keeps moving away from the foundations and away from reality.
Right.
And the only eventual result of that is collapse.
Right.
And I don't believe that is lost on the people engineering this.
Oh, no.
I think you have to understand that there's a major difference between the top of the pyramid, the people that are really moving, and not even the people, but the demonic powers, because the Bible says that we're not wrestling against flesh and blood, right?
It is not a physical battle. It is a spiritual battle.
It's a spiritual battle.
It is, and it's happening.
And let
me just go back and say about the little demon. It is. It says the little demon show was brought to viewers on FXX. Courtesy of the Walt Disney Company, which took control of FXX network through its purchase of 20th Century Fox. So
there you go. So it's all the same company at the end. It's Fox, but they're owned by Disney and
speaking of Fox, we could talk a little bit about Fox News and the disappointment there. But maybe even in that article I was reading about Dylan Mulvaney or McVaney or whatever.
Yeah.
As a guy dressed like a girl, but yet they will refer to him as a her.
Yeah.
And it's bizarre when they are referring to men who dress like women as she, her. I'm just going to be. It's bizarre. Did you ever see Napoleon Dynamite?
I love that movie. Actually, I've seen it a lot of times.
All right, when he's in the Happy Hands Club. And they're singing "Some Say Love It Is a River,"
Yeah.
And he's doing his hands up in the air.
Yeah.
And Don, who's the athletic guy, like the most popular guy in school, sitting on the front row, and he's kind of laughing, looking around at everybody. It's like, are y'all seeing what I'm seeing?
Yeah.
That's kind of how people feel about things going on in our culture today.
Yeah.
Everybody's like, nobody's really saying anything, or not as many people are saying something as I thought they would. Are y'all seeing what I'm seeing?
Yeah.
I mean, there's something going on here. And, I think about even Twitter. Of course, Elon Musk did go through with the purchase.
Yeah.
And he tweeted out, the bird is free.
Mm.
And now all these people who didn't say stuff for 2 years, now all of a sudden they're just letting it all go. They're saying all kind, things that you couldn't say. There are two genders, or Rachel Levine is Richard Levine. Certain things you couldn't say because they would kick you off Twitter, or they put you in Twitter jail. And now they're saying it, and it just shows you that one thing I found out is that there are a lot of people that if you tell them to be quiet, they're going to be quiet.
I think that's most people.
That is most people. I had been shocked at the number of people that, I'll go back when I was a teenager. We went to a big wrestling match down in Savannah. Did you ever go to wrestling matches?
I haven't before, actually.
Okay, we actually one time we got chased by the Road Warriors. That's another story. But we were down in Savannah, and we were all standing up, screaming, yelling at the wrestlers. We were pretty close, maybe second or third row, and Arn Anderson got up there to wrestle, and we stood up and started yelling at him. He pointed at my friend and told my friend to sit down and shut up. He sat down and shut up. Now, the rest of us didn't, but my friend, he sat down and shut up. And that's kind of like what this culture is doing. They're pointing at people and saying, sit down and shut up. We're going to tell people what's moral. Even Biden, talking about the bathroom issues and stuff, that it's the transgender stuff. It's a moral issue. Being able to help kids transition their sex. It's a moral issue. Now, they're able to say it's a moral issue, but if we ever say it's a moral issue,
yeah,
or if a pro-abortion gubernatorial candidate like Beto O'Rourke or Stacey Abrams goes to a church and speaks, at a church, it's not considered, an infringement of separation of church and state. I know that's a whole touchy topic there itself, but if a conservative politician goes to a church, then that is considered what, Christian nationalism, or
Well, yeah, there's always a double standard, and that kind of brings me back to we were talking about how the public schools got started, and the idea that they were going to be non-sectarian originally did not mean that they weren't going to have Bible reading or prayer.
Yeah.
It just meant that it wasn't going to be like a church running it or a denomination running it.
Right. They were about denominationalism back then.
So like Horace Mann was saying, oh yeah, the Bible's going to be there, but we're just going to let the Bible speak for itself, and it's not going to be like a denominational reading of it, right? Well, fast forward to the 1960s, and then all of a sudden the Supreme Court ruled that to have any Bible in the school or any prayer in the school was somehow a violation of the Constitution.
After all those years.
It wasn't a violation for all those years, but now in the 1960s, it's a violation of the Establishment Clause, that the government will make no law, concerning an establishment of any religion.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, but I have a big problem with what the Supreme Court did there, because and it's not just there, but a lot of what they did at that time in history, they were grasping at straws to try to defend what they were doing from laws that really had nothing to do with it. Right. The idea that the Constitution would have been written to outlaw prayer in schools.
That would never happen. That would never happen back then.
Does anybody really think that the framers of our Constitution were opposed to prayer in schools?
Never happened back then.
Yeah.
That would have never
Does
happened.
anybody think that? No. They just use that as a pretext.
Yeah.
Is all they did.
Well, it's like the Roe v. Wade right to privacy, 73, and then it just got overturned. The Supreme Court, even the Dred Scott decision, they do overturn themselves later on when they realize, hey, that was a terrible, terrible ruling.
Yeah.
And hopefully one of the things I'm hoping is they go back and revisit the Obergefell decision, same-sex marriage, and they'll realize that, boy, that was a really, really boneheaded decision. That was a terrible decision. And
I wouldn't count on it, but we can hope, I guess. But
you just never,
But
Clarence Thomas thinks they could. I love Clarence Thomas. I think he's the best justice on the Supreme Court, personally. But and it's not just because he's from Savannah and everything. But I like Clarence Thomas. But hopefully there's some decisions that will be revisited and that will be corrected. But ultimately, it's going to be God that's going to do what God's going to do. We know from Scripture that basically, for want of a better way of putting it, the world's headed to hell in a handbasket, right?
Right. And the problem I see with a lot of people who are involved in like they call it the truther movement, and there's all this discussion of conspiracy, which I do believe that there are quote unquote conspiracies going on, and
the whole world's under a satanic conspiracy according to Scripture, right?
Yeah, but this phrase conspiracy or conspiracy theorist is used as a club to beat people with.
Right.
So I don't even really like to use the word.
It's used in a way that says, "Hey, be quiet."
Yeah.
Sit down and shut up.
That's not something you're allowed to talk about, right? Basically.
Right.
But the point I was making is that this is we're in a situation where there are things that are not allowed in the discourse anymore, and basically people are just sitting around and acting like it's normal.
Right.
And that's the Soviet Union in a nutshell.
Right.
We are living in Soviet Union 2.0 in this country, and we just haven't figured it out yet.
Well, we have some people say the January 6th committee's basically a show trial.
Yeah.
I mean, the way they're conducting that's similar to, the way the state, the USSR used to do their stuff. It's frightening, actually.
Yeah. And I almost lost my train of thought. But what I was going to say is these Christian truthers, and a lot of the truther movement are not Christians at all. And
right. You're exactly right.
And you wind up seeing these well-meaning Christians locking arms with people that are actually opposed to the gospel,
right?
Because
You're
they
exactly
think
right.
That somehow they're gonna stop what's coming,
right?
Right?
Right.
Oh, if we all just get together, we can stop this one world government, right?
Yeah. Some are talking about return of Christ. Others, the age of Aquarius?
Yeah, age of Aquarius. So there's a lot of New Age stuff getting mixed in,
right?
So. But as a Christian, we have to understand that God's prophecy will be fulfilled.
That's right.
There's no way to avoid it. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do all we can to do what's right with the time that we're given, right?
You're exactly right.
So the reason the prophecy is going to come true is because most people aren't going to do what's right, and that's why evil can flourish.
That's right.
So it's not that we have no power. To me, it's not that God is forcing this bad outcome to occur, but rather God knows that it will occur because we're going to let it happen.
Right. One of my favorite characters in Scripture is King Josiah. He's the last good king of Judah. Okay. Came to the throne when he's 8 years old. His daddy was a bad man. When he was 16 years old, the Bible says he began to seek the Lord. And he started... Shortly thereafter, as years went by, he started making repairs to the temple. Okay, and when they go into the temple, they find the book of the law, and so they bring it to him. They give it to his chief of staff, and he brings it to him, and he starts reading the book of the law, probably from Deuteronomy. And Deuteronomy talks about the blessings and the cursings that will come to the children of Israel if they get away from God. And he realized, oh no, what does this mean? We are in bad shape because our fathers have done really, really bad things. And so what he does is he gets those guys to go seek the advice of a prophet. So they don't go to Jeremiah, who's around at that time, or some of the others. They go to this lady named Huldah, and she says, look, yes, it's going to come to pass. The bad stuff that's going on is going to come to pass. They're going to fall under these curses. But tell the one who sent you to find out this word that it will not happen in his lifetime because he has set his heart to seek the Lord. So basically, yes, this is going to happen, but Josiah, it's not going to happen during your lifetime. And so what does Josiah do? He starts doing the very best he can. He knows that the country's going after him, but he starts making reforms. He starts getting rid of the altars, the pagan altars. He burns things up. He basically refurbishes the temple. He reinstitutes the Passover. I mean, it had been since the days of Hezekiah that anybody had done a Passover the way he throws the Passover. I mean, it's a massive Passover. And he instructs the people to seek the Lord. Now, he does this because he wants to do right. And he wants to make the very best of the time he has, even though he knows it's going to pot after he dies.
Yeah.
So he does the very best he can. And sure enough, when the Pharaoh's coming through to join with the Syrians to fight the Babylonians, he goes out to fight with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, "Don't do it. You don't want none of this." And Josiah basically says, "Get off my lawn." And they get he goes to battle with him, and he gets killed. And sure enough, after him, there'd be 4 weak kings, and they eventually go into Babylonian captivity. But I always liked it that Josiah, even though he knew that he was on a sinking ship, he was on a losing team, he was going to do his very best until it was all over.
Yeah.
And I think that's how we as Christians, we've been called to be salt and light. We know the direction ultimately the world will go, and there's going to be more people who want to do wrong than do right. There's going to be more that don't want to follow God than want to follow God. And, Jesus talked about the broad path that leads to destruction and the narrow way that leads to eternal life. There's a big difference there. But until he takes us out, we need to do the very best that we can. And so we can make observations about what's going on in our culture. We can talk about what's going on with politicians, the president, Disney, all this stuff. And we need to fight. We need to remember it's a spiritual battle. There are personalities involved, but ultimately we're against principalities. See, that's a preacher thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so we've got to be on our P's and Q's. We got to be sober, be vigilant, because our adversary, the devil, goes about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. So, and we're in this spiritual battle. So I think what we wanted to do with this first podcast, as we kick it off, is kind of get the juices flowing. Talk about there is an attack on kids. And parents need to be aware of what their children are exposed to. You need to find out what's going on at their school. You need to find out what they're involved in on the internet. You need to find out who are the influencers in their lives. Because I always like to say, you got the baseline, you got the angle. If you have just an angle that's 3 or 4 degrees, you don't see that big of a difference. But the more time goes by, that top line and that baseline, there's going to be a lot more difference. Yeah. And if Satan can set your child off in a different way just by a few degrees.
Well, that's what Satan did with our whole society. Like we've been talking about. It's been a gradual push away, and it has reached a point now where we're starting to get into major distress, right? But everybody's acting like this came out of nowhere, right? And it didn't. It did not come out of nowhere. Right. It's just that for all those previous decades, it was being contained, you might say. It was like, oh yeah, I don't like the way this is headed, but things are still pretty good, and I'm still pretty comfortable.
My little corner of the world's okay.
And I'm not talking about. I'm including the church in this. Right. The church is. Right. We're the ones that God entrusted with all this knowledge. Why aren't we should be the ones that are leading the charge and stopping what's going on, but we're not as a church.
Yeah, one thing that really irks me a lot is that you'll have some people. I was born in the mid '60s, so I grew up during the Cold War. I remember everything about Soviet Union. There was really a line of demarcation at that time between NATO, Eastern Bloc nations. I mean, was, then you had the Third World, but you had people in 2 camps, basically, and so there was more of an understanding of right and wrong, good and evil, light and darkness. Yeah. With the United States as compared to the Soviet Union, their godlessness, and with the communism and all that. But after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the destruction of communism at that time, I mean, they've just kind of redone it now. Everything just kind of got mixed in together. It really did. It just kind of you didn't have the lines separating it like you used to. It was not as easy to see, and I think people have fallen into a. I don't want to say syncretic, but they've fallen into just such a mixture of morality and ethics, and there's just no guiding biblical principle in our culture. Even in Western Europe, that is just a gospel-hardened, especially the northern part, just really godless in a lot of ways. And a lot of those nations haven't been over there. They're kind of proud of that they've kind of moved past God.
Oh yeah, I've been in contact with a lot of Europeans, studied abroad.
Used to live in Russia, or where?
I did live in Russia for a little while with my wife as we were teaching English over there in Moscow. But I've also, interacted with a lot of international students when I was in college at UGA. I was doing international student orientations and things. And I studied abroad in Japan in 2006. Okay. And a lot of the roommates and people I had, not roommates, but long story there, but Europeans that I met on that campus. And so I'm pretty well aware of what the European mindset is,
Right.
and it's very much secular and post-Christian.
Right. Very post-Christian.
But I also know that whatever's going on in Europe is about 5 years ahead of what's going on in America.
It's coming.
And,
You're right.
and so that kind of secularism, hyper-secularism that exists in Europe hasn't fully taken over in all parts of this country
Right.
yet, but it will. Just give it time.
Right.
We need to see the writing on the wall. We need to be more aware of what is going on in the culture, and aware that for my family, we've made a decision. At least at this point, we're going to attempt to homeschool because we've decided.
So many people are doing that.
We've decided that it's gotten so far to a point in the public schools that we're just not even going to participate in it anymore.
Right.
And
not there are good public school teachers out there and administrators. We don't want to negate that. But you don't control the curriculum. People there's curriculum. There's stuff going on that some people, we don't want to. There are good public school teachers, but a lot of people feel like Paul and his wife that it's just too much of a chance of a risk.
Well, John Dewey is another philosopher that gets credited with a lot of influence in the public education sphere. He was a secular humanist,
Right.
so certainly not a Christian. But he wrote in his book Democracy in Education, the intermingling in the school of youth of different races, differing religions, and unlike customs creates for all a new and broader environment. Common subject matter accustoms all to a unity of outlook upon a broader horizon than is visible to the members of any group while it is isolated. The assimilative force of the American public school is eloquent testimony to the efficacy of the common and balanced appeal. Now, on the surface of it, that sounds maybe like a real great quote, a really good idea. Mm-hmm. But the key phrase there is the unity of outlook upon a broader horizon. So what he's getting at is we are giving a new unified outlook to all these students. In other words...
And God's not in it, right?
God's not in it. No, because this is a quote-unquote broader horizon. Broader than what? Well, broader than the Bible.
Right.
Broader than Christian upbringing.
Right.
John Dewey wanted students to be brought up in a way that wasn't specific to Christianity.
Right.
But what does that really mean? That is the creation of a new religion.
That's right. That's right.
It's a new religion. It's a state-sponsored religion. And where have we heard of state-sponsored religion before? Soviet Union again. Or in their case, it was state-sponsored religion of Marxism.
Right.
And
right. Full compliance.
Yeah.
Total compliance.
And one thing that I think we've all seen, especially through the pandemic, is the explosion of government power and control.
Yeah, and what got me is when they were making people lose their jobs because they would not take an experimental vaccine. And if you've got vaccinated, that's your business. That's your call.
That was a scary time.
But when people, like me, I didn't want to get. I do not want to get that COVID vaccination. I just don't. I never intend to get it. I've had COVID and I lost my smell, taste, and still haven't got my taste back in clothes or hairstyle yet. But I had the effects of it and everything. But there's something when the coercive way that they were using to make people get that vaccine with threatening their livelihood for something that they had a high percentage rate of survival from. And there is a greater percentage of being injured by the vaccination for certain age groups than there is, benefits from getting the vaccination. So,
well, let's say that COVID had a high death rate. Mm-hmm. Would it then be justified to threaten people's livelihood? Or would it? Because I would say even then it still wouldn't be justified.
Yeah.
Because really, a right, There's the quote about, if you're willing to give up your freedom or your rights for security, right, then you don't deserve either one. Isn't that a Benjamin Franklin, I think, perhaps?
Yeah.
But
And then there's something in the Nuremberg Code that where
that's
you're not supposed to be experimented on against your will.
exactly. But see, you're not supposed to say any of that stuff anymore.
Okay, but you can now because Elon Musk has bought Twitter.
Maybe.
And you can put it on Twitter.
You can
now.
put it on Twitter
we
now.
may even
maybe.
have this. We may even put ourselves on Twitter. Who knows? Yeah. Yeah, but that's true. It's unreal the way that
It's authoritarianism in our own
it
country.
is authoritarianism. And I had to, with several folks as a pastor, I had to write I had to endorse their religious exemption for their employer.
Yeah.
And I think every one of them, their employer took it, which was
Yeah.
good. But some of them had friends and others that did not want it, absolutely did not want it, but they were faced with, am I going to lose my job? I've got so many years at this company.
Yeah.
I do not want to do this. I do not want to put this in my body, but I've got to. Now, when people are made to make that choice,
Yeah.
and when we find out some of the stuff that was manipulated, and I do believe there was some stuff that was manipulated with the whole pandemic. I know people got sick. I know people died from COVID. I'm not minimizing that. I understand that. But the way they manipulated and the way they used it to exert control, that's what totalitarianism does. That's what big government reaches for. And I think a lot of people had their eyes open. And like I say, we just, in this podcast, we're about to bring this to a close. But in this podcast, we want to just give voice to a lot of those things that you see, that you hear, and you think, y'all seeing this? Anybody else seeing what I'm seeing? Anybody else think that these people are crazy?
Yeah.
Does anybody else think that man walking around dressed like a woman? The guy interviewing the president of the United States, talking, who has all these conversations in other places about his Barbie pouch and all this stuff. Does anybody else think that that's bizarre? That that's crazy?
Yeah. Well, I think Christians, what I want to leave people with is a truth that maybe I don't think gets talked about enough in our churches, but the Bible refers to Satan as the adversary.
That's right.
But that's not the only way that Satan is referred to in the Bible. Satan is also referred to as the ruler of this world and the God of this world.
That's right. The whole world lies under the sway of the evil one. That's what
So,
it says, 1 John.
Now, the whole world, does that include the United States?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it does.
Yes.
But everybody wants to say, well, not our country.
Yeah.
Our country is good.
We got the best thing going, but it's still,
We're still under the power of the evil one.
Yeah, yes.
And what is the evil one? Is the evil one of light or darkness?
Yeah, he's of darkness and he
So-
is malevolent.
So when Christians look down their nose and use the phrase conspiracy theorist like it's a bad word, I just want to ask those Christians, who do you think is at the top of this world? Because the Bible says it's Satan.
Yeah,
Satan's a liar.
Right. I've always said I'm a conspiracy theorist. I believe there's a big conspiracy going on. It's a satanic conspiracy, and it is worldwide.
Yeah, but for it to have an effect on this world, that satanic conspiracy doesn't just stop in the spiritual realm. It connects with the physical.
That's right.
There are
you're right.
people taking action based on there are flesh and blood people that are taking their actions to serve Satan. And I believe some of them, and I'm not going to try to prove this statement, but I personally believe that at least some of them at the very top are doing it intentionally and knowingly.
Yeah. I think. Let me just say this: in some of our coming episodes, we are actually going to talk about aliens,
Okay.
demons. We're going to talk about creationism. We're going to talk about stuff that you need to know about. And Paul has actually been on a documentary about aliens. Is that right, Paul?
Well, no, I was a
Extra.
I was a stunt double, if you will.
Stunt double. Stunt man Paul. And stunting is a habit, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's been a fun talk.
Yes,
I'm
it's
really
been great.
glad I got the opportunity to take part.
And we're going to have more episodes coming, so we want to thank you all for being a part of this, for listening in, and we're going to try to tackle some interesting topics, and we're going to do it from a biblical perspective. And we need to let you know that the views that we express on this podcast belong to Marty McLain and Paul Price. They are our views. They do not reflect the views of anyone else. And with that said, we hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time on the podcast.